thought it would be good to start here at the railroad tracks at the train station. Whoop, that's all right. The history of our railroad, you know, the initial plan to put a railroad in here actually dates back to the 1830s. And this would have been part of what we refer to as Thaddeus Stevens' Tapeworm Railroad. But the project was very expensive. You know, at that time, they had it running into the mountain range out there, and there were cuts and fills, and they cut tunnels through the mountain. And eventually, they abandoned the project. It was called the Pennsylvania Railroad officially. There were several different projects to try to restart and establish a railroad. But finally, in the 1850s, the Gettysburg, Hanover Junction Railroad was formed, and in 1858, tracks were brought into town and train service started here in December of 1858. The building there, the railroad station, was built in May, completed in May of 1859. And the Gettysburg, Hanover Junction Railroad connects about 30 miles in that direction to the Northern Central Railroad, which leads from Harrisburg to Baltimore. And this would be the railroad which most of the people who came to see Gettysburg Address from afar came into. Of course, during the battle, the train station was used as a hospital. And at the time that the visitors were coming in for the Gettysburg Address, there were still coffins on the platform behind the station because they were brought in to be used to put the soldiers into them that were being reburied in the Soldiers' National Cemetery. The train station was owned for a time by the railroad company. Passenger service here stopped in like 1946. And the train station was then owned by the town, and now the Park Service and the Gettysburg Foundation has an attraction in the train station where you go in and you wear virtual reality glasses, and they do a presentation. So if you haven't been in it, it's really, really fascinating. You probably know that over the years it's been a variety of colors, and they've tried now to make it the color it appeared at the time of the battle when Abraham Lincoln arrived here. According to Gettysburg resident Harvey Sweeney, on the morning of November 18th, the heavy trains and cars began to pour in, laden with masses of human beings. Train after train came. Nothing scarcely could be heard but the loud snort of the iron horse and the rumble of the long, heavy trains. According to the Gettysburg Star and Sentinel, the influx of strangers commenced on Monday, the 15th, and the trains became heavier and heavier as the day of consecration approached. On Wednesday night, and Thursday morning, trains arrived every few hours, swelling the crowd to immense proportions. And it seems as if a lot of the cars that came in were brought in from other places, and there were lots of railroad sidings here for the various businesses at that time to put all the cars onto the side of. But there was only a couple locomotives that could use this particular railroad because the heavier trains of the Northern Central could not bring cars over along this road. And according to the passengers at that time that used it, this was not the best engineered railroad in the United States. And there were a lot of complaints, especially amongst the newspaper reporters coming over on this road. So the trains had to be brought to Hanover Junction, detached from their locomotive, hooked up to a local locomotive, and brought over to Gettysburg, the 30 miles. And it was an interesting problem. Now, Governor Curtin came up with this plan that Lincoln's train would ride to Hanover Junction from Washington and Baltimore, and the Governor Curtin's train, which would be filled with governors of the various states, would actually meet them at Hanover Junction. All the cars would be attached together, and they would all come over together. But there was a slight accident on the railroad line north of here, and there were some mechanical issues with the governor's train, and his train did not arrive at Hanover Junction at the appointed time. So after Lincoln and his party sat around for a while at Hanover Junction, again 30 miles in that direction, they put the cars, the 4 cars, onto a locomotive, and it came over to Gettysburg. And of course, his train arrived here about 6 p.m. on November 18th. And I mentioned yesterday when Gary and I did a
indoor
version
extravaganza.
Of this. Yeah. How many people were there, by the way? Look, there's a good amount of people. We mentioned that a story has developed over the years that Abraham Lincoln wrote the Gettysburg Address on the train on the way here. And nothing could be farther from the truth. It's just one of those myths associated with the address that have become popular over the years. And throughout the tour, we'll mention the myths that, the most commonly heard myths about the Gettysburg Address, like no one clapped at the ceremony after Lincoln gave the speech. Lincoln was riding a horse that was too small for him. He wrote the Gettysburg Address on the envelope on the back of a train, on the back of an envelope.
As we go along, the events of the 25 hours Lincoln were here, he wasn't kind enough to put them in geographical chronological order. So when we go to the Presbyterian Church, we're going to skip ahead in the story, and our script will lag behind a lot of what we do. So keep that in mind along the way. We think that you're all familiar with enough of the basics to have this make sense.
My favorite account of this is from a 1913 book written by a son of Horatio King. And basically, according to this story, he and his father had visited Governor Curtin in 1897, and Governor Curtin told him this: "As we were riding in the train to Gettysburg, Mr. Lincoln asked me for some writing paper. I replied that I had none, but taken from my pocket several addressed envelopes, I cut them open and thus presented a clean surface. I gave them to the president, who withdrew to a seat by himself and began to write. Before reaching Gettysburg, he handed me the slips with the request that I have a clear copy made. This I had done at the Eagle Hotel, and I gave him a copy. Then unthinkingly, I threw the slips of paper away." They would be priceless now.
But,
well, I was just going to say this interesting story, and of course this is Governor Curtin talking. Governor Curtin was on a different train. So this is used in several books. And the first appearance of this idea that Lincoln wrote on the address as an afterthought on the train is from a book that the first one I found, Life of Lincoln, by a guy named Arnold in 1885. So it started early on, and it just kind of grew over the years, this myth.
And is Horatio King actually suggesting that he collected Lincoln's papers and then he had in Lincoln's hand written the Gettysburg Address, that it's not even Lincoln's Gettysburg Address? He had it done at the Eagle Hotel.
Yeah.
It's almost like he got rid of the scraps, but he also claims sort of to be the author in a lot of ways as well.
And then the most popular version of the story is in The Perfect Tribute by Mary Raymond Shippen Andrews from 1906. And, I just tend to think that a lot of times in history we know that what's popularly known about subjects actually comes from a novel written about the historical event than the historical event. So that's not unusual. It was dark, of course, when the train arrived here. And the train also included Secretary of State William Seward, Postmaster General Montgomery Blair, Secretary of the Interior John P. Usher, Provost Marshal General James Fry, General Robert Schenck, the commander of the Middle Military District of Baltimore, and the French Foreign Minister, the Italian Foreign Minister, representative of the Canadian Ministry. Mayor Frederick Lincoln of Boston was definitely on that train with Lincoln, and John Nicolay and John Hay, Lincoln's secretaries. Ward Lamon, or Layman, Lincoln's friend and Grand Marshal of the procession, had arrived here a few days earlier to make arrangements for the day of consecration. During the 1920s, there was actually much talk in local newspapers about bringing back the actual car that Lincoln traveled in to Gettysburg. And there was a bunch of discussion about it, and they were going to put it right there next to the station. But after years of searching, it was determined that it had been destroyed. And the coach was never accounted for. Okay.
One thing that's easy to forget here is that we talk about it. A lot of people start their tours with Gettysburg, 2,000, 2,400 people. It's a small farming community. True enough, okay? But Gettysburg, is 2,400 people. LA is 4,000 at that time, or at least in 1860. Albuquerque and Santa Fe are about the same size as Gettysburg. The train had come to town. It had gas lighting. If I'm correct, 6 churches, 3 banks, 2 educational institutes of higher learning. So we call it a small farm community now. This was a place on the rise, okay? And if you look at LA, Albuquerque, and Santa Fe now, you see what has happened. In part, the Battle of Gettysburg has kept this place, what it is, the place we all want to visit, with 7,000 or 8,000 residents right now, because it's hemmed in by the battlefield itself. It's just easy to note this while you're walking through town. Keep in mind that this was a place really on the up.
I wanted to mention that following the address, all the people who came in by train had to leave by train. And according to the Star and Banner, thousands of people gathered at the depot, anxiously awaiting transportation to their homes, but were compelled to remain until after the departure of the president. They had put the president's train on the track, and no one could leave town before he was ready to leave. And so, I don't know what time the address ended, but then they went back to the Wills house, and there was a luncheon, and there was a reception, and then they went to the Presbyterian church. So it wasn't until 7 p.m. that the president's train left. And then theoretically, they put more cars on the track, but most of them had to wait for the trains to come back and hitch up the other cars the 30 miles and then take them out. So it wouldn't have been until the middle of the night that most of the people started to be pulled out to leave Gettysburg. And there was, lots of disgruntled visitors in our town. So not only was November 19th like the first heavy visitation day in our town, it was the first time that visitors complained about our town.
Actually, during the battle, you had some newspaper guys, right?
Yeah.
This is the second busiest day in Gettysburg's existence up to that time. I think that both the battle and this would be exceeded maybe when, in 1938, when they dedicated the Peace Light and FDR was here. But this was a big deal. I mean, this is 2,400 people, like I said, up and coming, but that doesn't mean they're ready to host a battle or the throngs of people. 15,000? 25,000, 30,000 people that came to Gettysburg for this consecration event, many of whom, as Tim will talk about, didn't have a place to stay. And you think that they are anxious to get out of town at the end of it? But no, the president has other things to do.
That's right.
So many of them didn't even know the president was going to be here, right?
That's correct. Yeah. People have asked me that before, and I guess maybe if I was more of a Lincoln, scholar, I might know that. We could ask some Lincoln scholars, but I haven't seen when it's announced that the president will be here. When do people learn the president is also attending the ceremony? I do not know the answer to that. But it couldn't have been that much before the ceremony.
He accepts on like the 4th?
Yeah, something? I mean, he got the invitation on the 2nd. Yeah, maybe accepts on the 4th. He probably doesn't tell people. People don't even know he's going to be here.
Interesting.
So most people had made arrangements to come here without knowing the president was coming, which is interesting.
Hello, this is Trace Atkins. To stay up to date on all the latest and coolest videos, please subscribe to the Trust YouTube channel. Preserve, educate, inspire.